The biting wind of the remote Caucasus Mountains whipped Dr. Eris Thorne's auburn hair across her face, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and an ancient, unsettling quiet. Below her, nestled precariously on a jagged plateau that defied modern cartography, lay the excavation site, a labyrinth of exposed rock and freshly turned soil. For weeks, the team had been toiling, chasing whispers of a forgotten civilization, a people whose existence had been erased from every known record. Eris, a renowned linguist and archaeologist, felt it in her bones. This wasn't just another ruin. There was a palpable weight to the air, a sense of something significant, something other, lurking beneath the surface. Her breath plumed in the frigid air as she surveyed the deep trench, where the dig's lead foreman, Merrick, gestured frantically. Descending into the depths, Eris found Merrick standing over a peculiar find. Embedded in a layer of rock far older than any human settlement in the region was not pottery or bone, but a perfectly smooth, obsidian-like slab. It radiated a faint, almost imperceptible hum that Eris could feel vibrate in her fingertips. It wasn't stone, not precisely. Its surface was cold to the touch, yet pulsed with an internal warmth. Intricate glyphs, unlike any cuneiform, hieroglyph, or ideogram Eris had ever encountered, adorned its face. They seemed to shimmer, refusing to hold steady in her vision. The team's geological dating equipment spun wildly, unable to establish a coherent age for the material. "It's impossible, Dr. Thorne," a junior tech mumbled. "It's off the charts, like it's not from here." Eris knelt, her gloved fingers tracing the alien script. A thrill, equal parts fear and exhilaration, shot through her. This was the secret history she'd felt lurking. Back in the dimly lit makeshift lab tent, Eris worked feverishly. The slab, now cleaned of centuries of grime, lay under an array of scanners. Her screens glowed with algorithms attempting to map the glyphs, to find a pattern, any Rosetta Stone that could unlock its meaning. Hours blurred into a single, intense focus. Coffee went cold, food remained untouched. Then, a faint resonance, a recurring symbol mirroring an obscure pre-Semitic ideogram for star, yet twisted, elongated. Eris felt a jolt. She cross-referenced it with another sequence, a series of geometric forms that, when aligned, bore an eerie resemblance to archaic Sumerian for watcher or observer. The hum of the slab intensified, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the tent. Merrick, peering over her shoulder, cleared his throat. "Are you seeing this, Dr. Thorne? The energy readings are spiking." The glyphs coalesced. A narrative began to emerge, chillingly vivid even in its fragmented form. Words, not spoken but felt, painted a picture of beings from the celestial spheres, charged with observing humanity. But they did not merely observe. They descended upon Hermon, a mountain referred to in whispers by ancient texts, a pact made, an oath sworn. Forbidden knowledge of metallurgy and sorcery, of dark arts that corrupted the natural order, was gifted. The most terrifying revelation pulsed through Eris's mind as the final symbols locked into place, a chronicle of unholy unions and the birth of giants who devoured men and stained the earth red. This wasn't a myth. This was a direct, first-hand account. Her mind raced, connecting the dots to fragmented legends of Nephilim, of a pre-flood world filled with untold horrors. The very foundations of human history, as she knew it, crumbled around her. The slab pulsed brighter, its faint hum now a guttural throb, as if confirming the ancient secrets it had guarded for millennia. The heavens, it seemed, were not always benevolent, and some angels truly had fallen.
The world was not yet heavy with the footsteps of many nations, but the silence of the Mesopotamian night carried a weight of its own. In the rugged plains of the ancient Near East, where the wind whispered through the scrub and the dust of the day finally settled, Abram stood alone. He was a man of seasons, his face a map of deep lines and sun-etched wisdom, yet his spirit remained restless, tethered to a promise that felt as distant as the horizon. Behind him, the low, dark silhouettes of goat-hair tents huddled against the cooling earth. A small campfire sputtered, casting dancing orange flickers against the limestone rocks, but Abram's gaze was fixed upward. Above him, the heavens were not merely a sky, but a breathtaking, infinite canopy of glimmering jewels. The Milky Way stretched across the deep indigo vault, like a river of silver fire, pulsing with a light that seemed to breathe. It was here, in the overwhelming scale of the cosmos, that the divine had spoken. The voice was not a thunderous roar, but a resonance vibrating in the marrow of his bones, commanding him to look up. "Count the stars, if indeed you can," the presence murmured through the stillness. "So shall your offspring be." Abram's hands, calloused from years of tending flocks and navigating the harsh terrain, gripped the rough woolen cloak draped over his shoulder. He wore an earth-toned tunic of beige linen and a weathered leather belt. He felt small, a single speck of dust beneath the gears of the universe, yet he felt chosen. He possessed no heir, and his wife Sarai was past the years of childbearing. The promise seemed an impossibility, yet looking at the celestial fire above, the impossible began to feel like the only truth worth holding. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant rain. Abram took a steady breath, his eyes reflecting the cold blue glow of the starlight. The journey ahead was not just one of miles, but of absolute surrender. He was to leave his father's house, the comforts of Haran, the city of his kinship, and the familiarity of the rivers, to wander into a land he did not know. It was a call to walk into the void, guided by nothing but a singular divine word. He turned his gaze toward the flickering embers of the campfire, where his servants and family slept. Tomorrow the tents would be struck. The stakes would be pulled from the ground, and the long trek toward the horizon would begin. Every step would be a testament to this moment under the stars. The journey would be arduous, fraught with the unknown dangers of a land dominated by foreign kings and strange gods. He was Abram of Ur, becoming a patriarch whose legacy would outlast the stones beneath him. The wind picked up, tugging at his graying beard, but he did not shiver. There was a warmth spreading through him, a divine assurance that the darkness of the desert was merely the canvas for a grander light. As the first chapter of his true life unfolded, Abram bowed his head in profound humility. The covenant was sealed not in ink, but in the shimmering light of the heavens. He was ready to go. The desert waited, and beyond it, the destiny of a people yet unborn.
The silence of the Mesopotamian night was no longer empty. It was pregnant with a promise that defied the logic of his aging body. Abram slowly lowered his gaze from the celestial expanse, the silver light of the Milky Way still dancing in his rheumy eyes. The cold wind tugged at his heavy woolen cloak, a sharp reminder of the physical world that remained unchanged despite the divine encounter. He began the slow, meditative trek back toward the orange glow of his encampment, his sandals crunching rhythmically against the dry, rocky earth. Each step felt heavier than the last, burdened by the impossible magnitude of what he had just witnessed. As the silhouettes of the goat hair tents sharpened against the darkness, Abram saw Sarai. She was seated by the embers of a dying fire, her frame draped in a simple linen shawl that caught the flickering warmth of the hearth. She looked up as she approached, her face etched with the same wisdom and weariness that marked his own. In the low light, her eyes sought his, searching for the reason behind his long, solitary absence in the dark. She did not need to ask. She could see the shimmering residue of the infinite reflected in his steady gaze. "The voice has spoken again," he whispered, his voice raspy from the dry night air. He sat beside her, the heat of the fire a stark contrast to the ethereal cold of the starlight. "We are to leave, Sarai, not merely for the next watering hole, but for a land we do not yet know. He has promised me a lineage that outnumbers the very stars I just counted. He has promised us a future that our hands cannot yet touch." Sarai did not scoff. Though her womb had been a silent, empty chamber for many decades, she looked at her husband with a fierce, quiet devotion. She knew the weight of the silence he had carried, and she felt the sudden shift in the atmosphere, a gravity that suggested the heavens had truly leaned down to touch the dust of their lives. "If the Creator calls," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the uncertainty of the path ahead, "then the dust must follow." The rest of the night was not for sleeping, but for the somber, urgent business of transition. By the time the first bruised purples and pale golds of dawn began to bleed across the eastern horizon, the camp was a hive of quiet, disciplined activity. Servants and kinsmen, led by his nephew Lot, began the arduous process of striking the tents. The rhythmic thud of wooden stakes being pulled from the earth echoed across the plains, sounding like the heartbeat of a new nation being born in the wilderness. Abram watched as the heavy linen was folded and the pack animals were laden with the symbols of their history, the heavy copper vessels, the intricate rugs, and the precious grain of their harvests. Every knot tied was a deliberate severance from the familiar.
They were leaving the security of Mesopotamia to walk into the unfolding mystery of the Canaanite wild. As the sun crested the rim of the world, Abram took his place at the head of the caravan. He gripped his staff, his gaze fixed forward. The journey of 1,000 generations had begun with a single trembling step toward the horizon.
As the first fingers of dawn brushed across the jagged edges of the horizon, the indigo sky surrendered its secrets. The infinite stars, which had served as the canvas for a divine covenant only hours before, retreated into the pale light of morning. Abram felt the chill of the desert floor seep through his leather sandals, a sharp reminder that while his spirit had soared among the constellations, his feet were still bound to the dust of the earth. He turned away from the vast solitude of the plains, his shadow stretching long and thin toward the small cluster of goat-hair tents that marked his temporary home. The camp was beginning to stir. The rhythmic sound of a stone pestle grinding grain against a mortar echoed the steady heartbeat of a life he had known for decades. Near the largest tent, a thin plume of blue smoke rose from a rekindled hearth. There, Sarai stood, her silhouette framed by the golden morning haze. She was a woman of quiet, luminous strength, her face a detailed map of shared journeys, arduous desert crossings, and unspoken sorrows. As Abram approached, she paused her work, her keen eyes searching his weathered features for the residue of the night's encounter. "The stars have faded," she said softly, her voice like the rustle of dry parchment. "Does the promise remain when the sun rises, my husband?" Abram reached out, his hand, calloused by years of guiding flocks, resting gently on her shoulder. The voice did not fade with the light, Sarai. It spoke of a future we cannot yet see, of a lineage that will outlast these mountains. We are to leave this place. We are to go to a land that will be shown to us. Sarai looked toward the horizon, where the road vanished into a shimmering heat haze. To leave meant abandoning the familiar wells, the safety of the kin groups, and the graves of their ancestors. It was an invitation to become wanderers, chasing a word spoken in the dark. Yet she saw the fire in Abram's eyes, a clarity that had replaced the weary fog of his old age. Without a word of protest, she began to gather the copper bowls and the woven baskets, her silence an act of profound courage. The camp soon became a hive of disciplined chaos. Servants gathered the bleating sheep and the lowing cattle, their voices mingling with the sharp clatter of tent poles being struck. Lot, his nephew, moved among the men with a restless energy, his eyes fixed on the southern horizon. The weight of the journey ahead pressed upon them all, 1,000 miles of scorching, relentless sand, treacherous hidden wadis, and unknown, potentially hostile tribes. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the caravan was ready. Abram stood at the head of the line, his staff gripped firmly in hand. He looked back one last time at the smoldering remains of their fire. The transition from a settled life to a nomadic existence was complete. As he took the first step into the wilderness, the dust rose around his ankles like a golden shroud. He did not know the winding path, nor did he know the specific trials that awaited his growing household in the lands of Canaan and Egypt, but the resonance of the promise hummed in his bones. The journey of faith had truly begun, carved into the very earth by the steady, rhythmic pace of a man who believed in the impossible. The sun rose like a hammer striking an anvil of bronze, casting long, distorted shadows across the salt-cracked earth. Abram turned his back on the fading memory of the stars, his sandals crunching against the dry shale as he descended toward the cluster of low-slung goatskin tents. The transition from the divine silence of the night to the waking world was jarring. The air, which had been biting and thin under the moonlight, began to thicken with the scent of wood smoke and the lowing of livestock. He felt the weight of his years in his knees, yet his heart remained buoyant, anchored by a secret that felt heavier than any stone altar he had ever built. As he approached the perimeter of the camp, the first wisps of blue smoke rose from the cooking fires. There, standing by the entrance of the largest tent, was Sarai. She was draped in a shawl of undyed wool, her face a map of their shared journeys, lines of laughter and sorrow etched deep by the harsh sun of Haran and the winds of Canaan. Her eyes, still sharp and observant, found his immediately. She did not ask where he had been. she saw the remnants of the night's awe still clinging to him like the morning dew. "The god of the heights has spoken," she said, her voice a soft rasp that carried both reverence and a flicker of pragmatism. Abram nodded, stopping before her. He took her hands, which were calloused from a lifetime of labor, yet remarkably steady. "He led me out beneath the canopy," Abram whispered, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the revelation. "He told me to count the stars, Sarai. He said our seed would be as numerous as those flickering lights. Not just a tribe, but a multitude of nations." Sarai looked away toward the horizon, where the heat was already beginning to shimmer over the dunes. A shadow of a smile touched her lips, but it was tinged with the bittersweet reality of her own body. They were old, well past the season of blossoms and fruit. To the world, they were a nomadic couple nearing the end of their tether, yet here was her husband speaking of an eternal legacy. "Stars in the sky are easy for the Almighty to command," she replied quietly. "But the earth is hard, Abram, and my womb is a dry well." "He did not ask for our logic, Sarai. He asked for our footsteps," Abram countered, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. He could see his servants beginning to stir, the young men leading the sheep to the watering troughs, and the women beginning the daily grind of grain. The normalcy of the morning seemed almost profane compared to the cosmic fire he had witnessed, yet he understood that the promise would have to be lived out in these very moments of dust and sweat. They stood together in silence for a long moment, two figures framed by the vastness of a land that had been promised to a lineage not yet born. The camp was now fully awake, a bustle of activity that signaled the start of another day's survival. Yet as Abram looked at the horizon, he no longer saw just a desert. He saw a kingdom. The journey was far from over. The climax of their faith was only just beginning to take shape in the shimmering heat.
The encampment was a living organism, a small island of domesticity in the vast, unforgiving sea of the wilderness. As Abram approached, the low bleat of the goats and the sharp, rhythmic sound of a woman grinding grain between two heavy stones rose to meet him. It was a symphony of the mundane, a sharp departure from the celestial choir that had occupied his thoughts only moments ago. The smell of wood smoke from the communal cooking fires hung low in the humid morning air, clinging to the heavy wool of his cloak. He felt like a stranger in his own life, a man carrying a secret that was too heavy for his shoulders, yet too bright to keep hidden in the shadows of his heart. Near the center of the camp, Sarai stood outside their primary tent, her hands busy with a piece of dyed linen, but her eyes were fixed on the path he had taken. When she saw him, her posture softened, the tension of a sleepless night spent wondering where he had wandered finally dissipating. She did not ask him where he had been. After decades of marriage, she knew the restless spirit that often drove him into the silence of the waste to seek the Creator. Instead, she watched his face, searching the deep lines for a sign of what he had found in the darkness. "You look as though you have walked through a furnace," she said, her voice a gentle rasp that carried the warmth of the rising sun. She stepped toward him, reaching out to brush a stray bit of desert dust from his tunic. Her touch was a grounding force, pulling him back from the infinite heavens to the gritty reality of their nomadic existence. Abram took her hands in his, feeling the thin, parchment-like skin and the strength that still resided in her fingers. "I have walked through a promise, Sarai," he replied, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet vibrating with a conviction that made her pause. He led her toward a low stone bench near the edge of their living space, away from the ears of the servants and herdsmen. The sun was now fully committed to the sky, turning the world into a vibrant palette of gold, amber, and deep ochre. He looked at her, seeing not just the lines of age, but the echoes of the young woman he had loved in Ur. The pain of her barrenness was a ghost that sat between them, a silent passenger on every journey they had undertaken. "The Lord spoke," he began, and he saw the flicker of hope battle with a long-cultivated cynicism in her eyes. He told her of the stars, how they had seemed to descend from the heavens to map out a lineage that would outlast the mountains they stood upon. He spoke of the dust of the earth, metaphors for a future they could not yet see. Sarai listened, her gaze dropping to their joint hands. The silence that followed was not the empty silence of the desert, but a heavy, reflective quiet. She did not laugh, nor did she weep. She simply breathed in the impossible weight of his words. For a moment, the bustling camp seemed to fade away, leaving only two elderly travelers standing on the precipice of a destiny that defied the laws of nature. The promise was beautiful, yet it felt like a heavy crown, a burden of faith that would require them to walk through many more shadows before they ever saw the light.
The smoke from the morning hearth fires spiraled upward in thin gray ribbons, seeking the same heavens Abram had just been contemplating. He moved through the camp with a slow, deliberate gait, his sandals pressing into the cooling ash and dry earth. The encampment was fully awake now, a microcosm of organized chaos against the backdrop of the indifferent wilderness. He reached the threshold of his own dwelling, where the heavy goatskin fabric was stretched tight against the wooden frame, stained by years of sun and seasonal rains. There sat Sarai, her posture remarkably upright despite the weight of the decades. She was winnowing grain, the rhythmic toss and catch creating a soft, percussive heartbeat for their small community. When her eyes met his, Abram saw the reflection of 1,000 questions she had long since stopped asking. The gold leaf light of the rising sun caught the fine particles of chaff floating around her, creating a shimmering veil that momentarily masked the deep lines of age on her face. To anyone else, she was a matriarch of great standing, but to him, she was the silent partner in a divine mystery that grew more baffling with every passing year. "The Lord spoke," he whispered, the words feeling heavy and foreign in the bright, practical light of day. He sat upon a weathered cedar stool near her, his joints protesting the movement with a dull ache. He reached out, taking her hand, a hand that had packed and unpacked their lives across a dozen different wildernesses, from the sophisticated streets of Ur to the rugged heights of Canaan. Her skin was like parchment, fragile but enduring. Sarai did not speak at first. She looked toward the horizon, where the heat was already beginning to shimmer, making the distant jagged hills dance like restless spirits. "The stars," she murmured, her voice a dry rasp that carried the weariness of a lifetime of wandering. Abram nodded, his heart hammering with a renewed, almost youthful vigor against his ribs. He described the vision, not just the visual majesty of the light, but the terrifying, beautiful feeling of being woven into the very fabric of the earth's future. He spoke of a son, a lineage that would carry their name and their God into an eternity they would never personally witness. A flicker of something, was it a spark of ancient hope or a shadow of bitter grief, passed over Sarai's features. She looked down at her lap, at the dry husks of grain that remained. "I am a withered vine, Abram. The sap has dried, and the season for fruit has long since surrendered to the cold grip of winter." Her voice was not mocking, but grounded in the harsh, physical reality of the flesh. "He is the creator of the vine," Abram countered, though his own voice wavered under the weight of the impossibility. The contrast between the majestic, celestial promise and the quiet, dusty reality of their childless tent was a chasm that seemed too wide for any human bridge. Yet, as he looked at her, he realized the promise was not a solitary burden. They were standing at the precipice of a climax they could not yet name, a moment where the divine would have to collide with the mundane. The journey ahead was no longer about finding grazing lands. It was a pilgrimage through the silence of God. Abram stood at the entrance of the largest tent, his hand resting on the rough, dark fabric of the goatskin. The transition from the infinite canopy of the heavens to the enclosed, intimate space of his home felt like a physical weight. Inside, the light was filtered and golden, catching the dust motes that danced in the air like microscopic galaxies. Sarai sat near the center pole, her hands busy with the rhythmic motion of spinning wool, though her eyes were fixed on the entrance. She was a woman whose beauty had not been erased by age, but rather refined into something more durable, like a canyon carved by a persistent river. When their eyes met, the silence between them was not one of distance, but of a shared history that spanned decades of wandering and waiting. He moved toward her, his joints aching with the familiar protest of a body that had traveled many miles, yet his spirit felt oddly buoyant. The encounter in the desert night had left a residue of holiness on him that he feared might dissipate if he spoke too soon. Sarai set aside the spindle, her gaze searching his face with a discernment that missed nothing. She saw the lingering reflection of the celestial light in his eyes, a brightness that did not belong to the morning sun. She knew the look of a man who had wrestled with the unseen and emerged both broken and blessed.
"The night was long, Abram," she said softly, her voice like the rustle of dry parchment. It was not a question, but an invitation. Abram sank onto the thick woven rug beside her, the scent of the hearth fire clinging to his cloak. He reached out and took her hand, a hand that was as familiar to him as his own breath, yet now felt like the focal point of a cosmic mystery. He thought of the stars, the shimmering, impossible multitude he had been told to count. He thought of the barrenness that had defined their lives, a silence in the womb that had echoed for years. Abram did not laugh, nor did she weep. She simply looked at their joined hands, two weathered vessels of flesh and bone, and then back at him. The impossibility of the promise hung in the air like a physical presence, thick and suffocating, yet strangely radiant. The world outside was beginning to roar with the demands of the tribe, the bleating of sheep, the shouts of the herdsmen, the clatter of the day. But inside the tent, time seemed to stretch then. Abram felt the stirrings of a new kind of resolution, a quiet fire that burned hotter than the desert sun. The path ahead was no longer just a search for grazing land or water. It was a pilgrimage toward a horizon that only God could see. The weight of the promise was heavy, but as he looked at Sarai, he realized they would carry it together, even if the road led into the heart of the unknown. The journey was far from over. In fact, the most difficult steps were only just beginning to form beneath their feet.
Sarai stood by the central pole of the tent, her hands stained with the flour of the morning's bread. She did not speak immediately. She had lived with Abram long enough to read the language of his soul in the set of his shoulders and the strange, distant fire in his eyes. The man who had walked into the tent was not the same man who had left it to seek the solitude of the night. There was a luminosity about him, a residue of the divine that the flickering oil lamps could not replicate. The scent of roasted meat and raw wool hung in the air, a familiar comfort that usually grounded him, but now it felt like a thin veil between the physical world and the eternal. Abram took a seat on a low cedar stool, his joints creaking in a way that reminded him of his mortality, even as his mind reeled with the concept of immortality through lineage. He reached out, his calloused hand covering Sarai's. Her skin was like parchment, fragile yet resilient, and he felt a sudden, sharp pang of sorrow for the decades they had spent in the quiet, aching hollow of childlessness. He looked at her, seeing the deep lines around her mouth and the silver in her hair, and wondered if he dared to speak the impossible. "The Creator spoke," he whispered, the words feeling too large for the small, confined space. "He led me out beneath the canopy of the heavens and told me to count the stars." Sarai's gaze remained fixed on their joined hands. "The stars are many, Abram, and we are but two who have grown old in the shadow of a promise that has yet to bear fruit." Her voice was not bitter, but it was heavy with the practical, weary reality of a woman who had seen the cycles of the moon come and go for a lifetime without the swelling of a womb. To her, the stars were beautiful, but they were also distant and cold. Abram squeezed her hand, his eyes burning with a conviction that seemed to radiate physical heat. "He did not just show me the stars, Sarai. He told me they are the map of our future, our children and their children, and the generations that will follow until the end of time. They will be as numerous as those points of light. He has bound himself to us with a covenant that cannot be broken by time or age." A silence settled over the tent, thick and transformative. Outside, the sounds of the camp, the barking of dogs, the calling of shepherds, the rhythmic thud of a loom, seemed to fade into a distant, muffled hum. Inside this small circle of goatskin, the world was being remade. Sarai looked up, and for a moment the years seemed to peel away from her face as she searched his expression. She saw the madness of a visionary, but she also saw a terrifying, beautiful truth. "A child?" she breathed, the words sounding like a prayer and a question all at once. "A nation," Abram corrected, his voice growing stronger. "We are no longer just wanderers looking for pasture. We are the beginning of a story that will be told when these mountains have crumbled to dust." The gravity of the moment pulled at them. They sat in the golden gloom, two old souls tethered to a cosmic decree, waiting for the first stirrings of a future that would change the world forever. The climax of their long journey was no longer a destination on a map, but a miracle waiting to be born.
The air within the tent was thick with the scent of roasted grain and the musky tang of livestock, a stark contrast to the sterile, infinite cold of the star-swept plains. Abram let his hand fall from the heavy, dark goatskin flap, the darkness of the interior swallowing the last of the dawn's golden intrusion. Sarai remained motionless, her hands stilled over the heavy grinding stone, her eyes searching his face for a sign of the man who had left her hours before. She saw the dust of the desert clinging to the silver of his beard, but beneath the grime was a luminescence that no desert wind could scour away. "The stars," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment, yet carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate the very poles of their dwelling. He spoke to me in the sacred, silent language of the ancient heavens themselves, Sarai. He moved toward her, his sandaled feet silent on the intricately woven rugs. He took her hands, flour-dusted and calloused by years of nomadic life, and held them with a tenderness that spoke of a shared lifetime of barren hopes and whispered prayers. "The void we have carried," he continued, leaning closer so only she could hear the sacred weight of his revelation. "The silence of our home that has echoed for so many seasons, it is to be filled." He showed me the dust of the earth and the sparks of the sky, and he said they are our children, not just a single son, but a vast multitude that will outlast the mountains of Ur. Sarai felt a tremor pass through his grip. She looked down at their joined hands, aged, wrinkled, and seemingly hollow of life's generative fire, and then back into the fierce, unwavering clarity of his gaze. A soft, bittersweet laugh escaped her lips. "We are old, Abram," she breathed, the reality of her withered womb a shadow that had defined her existence for decades. But even as she spoke the words of doubt, she felt the shift in the atmosphere, a thickening of the air as if the tent itself were expanding to hold a truth too large for its humble seams. Abram did not flinch. He did not offer the easy, earthly comfort of a husband, but the iron certainty of a prophet. "The one who stretched the curtains of the night does not measure time by the flickering of an oil lamp or the turning of a season," he replied. He stood taller now, the exhaustion of his night watch replaced by a supernatural vitality. Outside, the camp began to bustle with the louder, chaotic noises of the morning, the rhythmic shouts of herdsmen and the clatter of bronze. But inside the goatskin walls, a profound transition was taking place. The promise was no longer a solitary vision held in the cold air of the heights. It had entered the domestic sphere, grounding itself in the very bread they broke. Abram felt the urgency of the journey rekindled in his marrow. They were no longer merely travelers seeking pasture. They were the architects of a lineage that would bridge the gap between the divine and the dust. He looked at Sarai, and in the golden, filtered light, he saw not just his wife, but the mother of nations, the silent partner in a covenant that would eventually remake the world's very foundation. The dawn of a new era had arrived. The silence between them was not the empty void of the desert night, but a space heavy with the resonance of a name unspoken. Sarai let the flour-smeared cloth fall to the earthen floor, the white powder settling like a ghost of the stars Abram had just described. She looked at her husband, seeing not just the man who had shared her youth in the gardens of Ur, but a patriarch who had been stripped of his past and reclothed in a terrifying, beautiful future. The golden light of the oil lamp flickered against the dark goatskin walls, casting their shadows long and intertwined against the fabric of their home. Abram took her hands in his rough, weathered palms meeting her own, which still carried the warmth of the morning's work. "He did not speak of what we have lost, Sarai," Abram whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of the revelation. "He spoke only of what is to come. I looked into the blackness, and the stars were not merely lights. They were faces. They were the breath of 1,000 generations. He promised that our laughter would one day echo through a lineage as vast as the sands we tread upon." Sarai did not pull away, though her mind raced to the reality of her own body, the barrenness that had been her quiet grief for decades. Yet as she looked into Abram's eyes, she saw the distant fire had settled into a steady, unquenchable glow. The impossibility of the promise was eclipsed by the absolute certainty of the promiser. Slowly, Sarai reached up to brush a stray grain of desert dust from Abram's beard. The skepticism that usually guarded her heart began to melt, replaced by a peace that defied the logic of her aging frame. She understood then that their journey was no longer a search for grazing land or a flight from distant kings. It was a pilgrimage toward a destiny that neither of them could fully comprehend, but both would now embrace. The air within the tent seemed to shift, the musky scent of livestock and roasted grain suddenly feeling like the sacred incense of a temple. "Then we must be ready," she said softly, her voice steadying his own. "If the heavens have spoken, the earth must respond." Together, they turned toward the tent's entrance. Abram pulled back the heavy, dark flap, and the transition was instantaneous. The intimate, amber-lit sanctuary of their domestic life was swallowed by the blinding, triumphant gold of the fully risen sun. The Mesopotamian wilderness lay before them, no longer a harsh and unforgiving wasteland, but a kingdom of potential waiting for the first footsteps of a new nation. They stepped out onto the salt, cracked earth together, the heat of the day already beginning to shimmer over the horizon. Behind them, the camp began to bustle with the energy of departure, tents being folded, livestock being gathered, and the rhythmic clatter of a life in motion. Abram looked out toward the distant hills, no longer a wanderer searching for a home, but a steward of the eternal. The dust beneath his sandals and the light of the stars above had finally met in the crucible of faith. As they began to walk, Abram did not see the end of his years, but the infinite, cinematic beginning of a story that would echo through the corridors of time forever.
The wind atop Mount Hermon did not merely blow, it whispered with the weight of secrets older than the dust of the valley below. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, clutched his reed pen with fingers gnarled like the roots of the ancient cedars, his long white beard whipping in the gale. His burlap robes, stained with the gray earth of the foothills, fluttered violently as he looked toward the darkening horizon. He was a man of words and silence, a scribe tasked with recording the lineage of a world that felt increasingly fragile. The sun had long since surrendered to a twilight that felt unnaturally heavy, a bruised purple sky that seemed to sag under an unseen burden. Suddenly, the stars did not twinkle, they trembled. Enoch squinted, his weathered face etched with a sudden, sharp anxiety. Above the jagged peaks, the celestial tapestry began to tear. A swirling vortex of violet and deep cyan light bled into the atmosphere, spiraling outward with the force of a silent explosion. It was a portal, a wound in the firmament, casting a cold, ethereal glow that turned the limestone rocks into shards of jagged silver. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone, and something sweet, like burning incense from a temple not built by human hands. Then came the first of them. He did not fall, he descended with a deliberate, crushing majesty. The figure was a colossal, towering humanoid silhouette that dwarfed the boulders of the summit. As the entity touched the ground, the mountain seemed to groan in submission. Enoch fell to his knees, his breath catching in a throat tight with terror. This was Semjaza, the high prince of the 200 who had looked upon the daughters of men and found them fair. The Watcher did not resemble the gentle messengers of Enoch's dreams. His skin was translucent, glowing with a faint, bioluminescent gold that pulsed like a dying star. He wore armor that seemed forged from frozen light and iridescent metals unknown to the smiths of the earth. When the being turned his head, his eyes ignited, two blazing torches of orange fire that cut through the volumetric fog rolling across the plateau. The dynamic light played across Enoch's trembling form, casting long, distorted shadows that danced against the ancient stones. "Why have you come to the realm of dust?" Enoch whispered, though he feared the answer lived in the very fire of the angel's gaze. Semjaza did not speak with a voice, but with a resonance that vibrated in Enoch's very marrow. Behind the leader, more lights began to pierce the clouds, hundreds of luminous streaks raining down like falling stars, each one a divine architect destined to become a destroyer. They were the Grigori, the silent observers who had finally broken their vow of distance. The atmosphere was heavy with floating embers and the shimmering residue of the heavens. Enoch watched, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, as the first of the fallen stood tall upon the summit. The world of men was no longer theirs alone.
The age of the giants, the Nephilim, was gestating in the shadows of this holy mountain. As the blue portal pulsed one final time before vanishing, Enoch realized his scrolls would no longer record the past. They would now become a chronicle of the apocalypse. The descent had begun, and the earth would never again know the peace of a simple night.
The sky above Mount Hermon did not simply darken. It shattered like a sheet of obsidian struck by a hammer of light. Enoch pressed his back against a jagged rock, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The whispers in the wind had transformed into a deafening roar, a celestial harmony that vibrated through his very marrow. From the center of the swirling violet vortex, the first of the great ones descended. This was not a spirit of soft wings and gentle comfort, but a titan of terrifying beauty. Semjaza, the leader of the 200, touched the summit with a force that made the mountain groan. He stood thrice the height of any man, his form clad in iridescent metal that flowed like liquid mercury. His skin radiated a bioluminescent gold, casting long, dancing shadows across the crags where Enoch crouched. Enoch's gnarled fingers tightened around his scroll. He was a scribe of the Lord, tasked with recording the history of a world that was already beginning to forget its creator. He watched, eyes wide and watering from the brilliance, as Semjaza's eyes ignited. They were not mere organs of sight, but twin furnaces of orange flame that pierced the thick volumetric fog. The angel did not speak with a tongue. He spoke with a resonance that shook the stars. "Scribe," the voice echoed, "witness the union of the heights and the depths." Behind Semjaza, 19 other luminous figures followed, their descent appearing like falling stars that refused to burn out. They were the chiefs of tens, the princes of the heavens who had looked upon the daughters of men and found their celestial immortality wanting. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and ancient fire. As the watchers gathered on the plateau, the atmosphere of the whole world shifted. It was as if the laws of nature were being rewritten by their very presence. Enoch felt the weight of their transgression before they even uttered their pact. He saw the way they looked toward the distant valleys, where the lights of human settlements twinkled like embers. There was a hunger in their fiery gazes, a curiosity that bordered on cruelty. "We shall bind ourselves," Semjaza declared, his voice a thunderclap that rolled down the slopes toward the sleeping world. "Let no one among us turn back from this purpose. We take the oath tonight." Enoch began to write, his hand trembling so violently that the ink splattered across the parchment like dark tears. He recorded their names, Arakil, Ramil, Kokabil, names that should have remained whispered in the highest spheres, but were now being tethered to the dust of the earth. He felt the shift in the spiritual tapestry. The purity of the pre-flood era was being stained by an unauthorized brilliance. The blue and violet portal above pulsed one final time before beginning to contract, sealing the watchers on the mortal side of the divide. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the storm. The great ones turned their attention from the heavens to the horizon, where the first warmth of dawn threatened to reveal their arrival to the world below. Enoch knew then that the age of peace had ended. The shadows on Mount Hermon were no longer cast by the moon, but by the looming silhouettes of those who had forsaken the eternal light to walk among the shadows of men. The violet rift in the firmament widened, bleeding a celestial ichor that stained the stars. Enoch watched, his breath hitching in his throat, as the first of the great descent breached the threshold between the eternal and the ephemeral. It did not fall. It arrived with the terrifying grace of a thunderclap. The figure that descended upon the crags of Hermon was a titan of light and metal, looming 20 cubits high, its very presence warping the air into shimmering heat waves. This was no messenger of peace, but a watcher, one of the holy ones who had looked upon the daughters of men and found the silence of heaven unbearable. Enoch's hand, though trembling, reached for the scroll tucked into his belt. He felt a desperate, holy obligation to record the impossible, even as the sheer magnitude of the sight threatened to shatter his mind. The being's skin was not flesh as men knew it, but a translucent, bioluminescent membrane that pulsed with a rhythmic gold glow, revealing veins of liquid silver beneath. It wore armor that defied the craftsmanship of the forge. Iridescent plates of metal shifted from deep cobalt to fiery copper as the creature moved. When it finally turned its gaze toward the stone where Enoch cowered, the prophet felt the heat of 2 suns.
The Watcher's eyes were not eyes at all, but swirling vortices like burning torches, glowing with a terrible ancient intelligence. "Scribe of righteousness," the being spoke. The voice did not travel through the air, but vibrated within Enoch's very marrow, a sound like grinding tectonic plates and the singing of crystal. "Do not hide your face in the dust of the mountain. You were called to witness the transition of eras." Enoch forced himself to stand, his burlap robes snapping violently in the supernatural gale. "Who are you?" he managed to croak, his voice thin against the roaring sky. "And why have you broken the seal of the heights?" The Watcher stepped forward, its footfall cracking the granite beneath it. This was Semjaza, the leader of the 200. He stood with a terrifying majesty, his silhouette carved against the swirling violet nebula that now dominated the heavens, casting a long, jagged shadow that seemed to swallow Enoch whole. Behind him, more lights began to descend, streaks of fire like falling stars, each one a prince of the celestial host abandoning their station. The air grew heavy with the sense of ozone and ancient incense. "We are the Grigori," Semjaza declared, his burning eyes fixed on the horizon where the lights of human settlements flickered in the valley below. "We have come to trade the boredom of eternity for the passions of the fleeting. We shall teach your kind the secrets of the stars, the forging of blades, and the binding of enchantments. Today, the blood of heaven mingles with the clay of the earth." Enoch looked up, seeing the sky teeming with descending gods. The majesty was suffocating, a beautiful apocalypse unfolding in silence. He dipped his reed pen into the ink pot, but the ink had frozen into a dark crystal. The world was changing, the natural laws bending under the weight of these divine invaders. The terror in Enoch's heart was matched only by a soul-crushing wonder. He realized then that he was not merely a witness to a visitation, he was recording the beginning of the end. The Watchers had landed, and the ground itself seemed to groan under the sacrilege of their grace. The light didn't just illuminate the mountain, it scoured it. Enoch shielded his eyes with a trembling hand, the ink on his fingers appearing black as pitch against the blinding radiance. The figure that stepped from the violet rift was not a man, though it bore a man's shape. It was a pillar of living gold, a titan forged from the essence of the dawn. This was Semjaza, the leader of the 200 who had cast their gaze downward from the heavens. As his feet touched the summit of Mount Hermon, the ancient granite beneath him did not crumble. It vitrified, turning to glass under the sheer intensity of his celestial vibration. The Watcher stood 20 cubits tall, his skin translucent and humming with a bioluminescent gold glow that pulsed like a dying star. His armor was a marvel of impossible geometry, iridescent plates that shifted colors, from the deep indigo of the abyss to the searing white of the sun as he moved. But it was the eyes that truly broke Enoch's spirit. They were not eyes of flesh, but twin vortices of flame, swirling with the knowledge of 1,000 eons and the hunger for a new, forbidden desire. "Enoch," the being spoke. The voice was not a sound, but a tectonic shift, vibrating through the prophet's marrow. It carried the scent of ozone and ancient incense. Enoch fell to his knees, his burlap robes feeling like a second, coarser skin against the smooth, terrifying perfection of the angel. "Master of the stars," Enoch managed to whisper, his voice thin as a reed. "Why have you pierced the veil? Why does the great height weep to see you go?" Semjaza did not look at the prophet. Instead, he looked toward the horizon, where the lights of human settlements flickered like fragile embers in the vast dark. "The great height is a cage of silence, son of Jared. We have come to bring the fire of the heavens to the valleys of the earth. We have seen the beauty of the daughters of men, and we shall choose for ourselves wives from among them." A cold dread, more piercing than the mountain wind, settled in Enoch's gut. This was not a visitation of grace. It was a mutiny of the divine. Behind Semjaza, the rift groaned again. Like stars falling from a wounded sky, more shapes began to emerge. Azazel, clad in shadows that devoured the light. Kokabeel, trailing constellations in his wake. Tamiel, whose breath brought the first taste of a winter that would never truly end. They gathered in a circle around the summit, their collective light turning the night into an artificial, terrifying noon. The air grew thick with the smell of scorched earth and the electric hum of power too great for the mortal realm to contain. Semjaza raised a hand, and the flames in his eyes flared brighter. "Let us all swear an oath," he commanded his brethren, "and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." Enoch watched, his pen forgotten in the dust, as the watchers clasped hands, their luminous skin searing his vision. The gravity of their pact seemed to warp the very air, pulling the breath from Enoch's lungs. He realized then that he was no longer just a scribe. He was the sole witness to the beginning of the end of the world. The sky above, once a familiar canopy of stars, now looked like a shattered mirror, reflecting a destiny he could scarcely comprehend.
The ground beneath Enoch vibrated as Semjaza took a single deliberate step forward. The heavy, iridescent metal of his greaves scraped against the limestone, a sound that echoed like a thunderclap across the peaks. As the angel leaned down, the golden bioluminescence of his face illuminated the deep lines of Enoch's weathered skin, revealing every ounce of the prophet's mortal fragility. The watcher stood twice the height of the tallest cedar on Hermon's slopes. Its skin was like polished alabaster, infused with the soft, pulsing glow of a dying star. Beneath that translucent surface, Enoch could see veins of pure gold light that surged with every movement. This was no messenger of comfort. This was a celestial architect whose very existence threatened to unravel the sanity of a mortal man. The angel's armor was forged from a metal that seemed to breathe, shifting its hue from deep indigo to shimmering silver as the mountain wind brushed against it. It bore no crest of any kingdom known to man, for its origin was the unapproachable light of the higher heavens. Enoch collapsed to his knees, his forehead pressing against the cold, unforgiving stone. He felt the heat radiating from the being, a dry, searing warmth that smelled of ozone and ancient incense. "Lord," he gasped, the word barely a tremor in the howling night, "have you come to judge the sons of Adam, or to bring us into the fire?" The watcher did not strike him. Instead, it tilted its head with a mechanical, predatory curiosity. When it opened its eyes, the shadows fled to the furthest corners of the valley. These were not human eyes. They were twin pits of concentrated solar fire, burning with an intensity that promised both infinite knowledge and total destruction. The harsh dynamic lighting cast Enoch's own shadow long and thin against the jagged rocks, a mere smudge of darkness in the presence of such overwhelming brilliance. "I am Semjaza," the voice resonated, not through the air, but through the marrow of Enoch's bones. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates, a melodic yet terrifying cacophony that made the prophet's teeth ache. Behind the great Semjaza, the violet rift began to pulse with renewed vigor. The portal did not close, it expanded, its edges fraying into the starry sky like a burning tapestry. More shapes began to coalesce within the shimmering void. These were the others, the 200 who had sworn a mutual oath to descend, to forsake their high estate for the sake of earthly desires. Enoch watched as silhouettes of impossible proportions began to step through the veil, their feet treading upon the air as if it were solid marble. "Write, scribe," Semjaza commanded, his eyes like torches boring into Enoch's soul. "Write that the heavens have opened, and the stars have fallen to the earth not in ruin, but in hunger." Enoch's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavier than the mountain itself. The ancient stones of Mount Hermon, which had stood silent for millennia, seemed to groan under the weight of the divine presence. The air was charged with static electricity. Every breath felt like inhaling liquid starlight. He reached for his reed pen, his hand shaking, yet driven by a duty he could not ignore. He was the witness, the scribe of the gods' rebellion. The world was changing forever. The voice of Semjaza did not travel through the air. It resonated within the marrow of Enoch's bones, a dissonant chord struck on the harp of the universe. "Scribe of the ancient ways," the great watcher intoned, his words shimmering in the cold mountain air like ripples of heat. Enoch cowered, his burlap robes feeling like a second, thinner skin against the overwhelming presence of the celestial being. The angel's bioluminescent gold glow cast a long, flickering shadow behind the old man, stretching toward the edge of the precipice where the world of men lay sleeping in the dark. "Why have you pierced the veil?" Enoch managed to whisper, his voice cracking like dry parchment. He looked up, his eyes watering from the sheer brilliance of the angel's countenance. Semjaza did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the violet rift that still pulsed in the firmament above. From that jagged wound in reality, more figures began to emerge. They descended not as light, but as falling stars, streaks of cyan and gold that slammed into the jagged peaks of Mount Hermon with the force of meteorites. One by one, the watchers took shape. There was Azazel, his armor dark as bruised iron, his eyes burning with a forbidden curiosity for the secrets hidden within the earth's crust. There was Arakil, whose very presence seemed to warp the winds, and Kokabil, whose skin was a map of the constellations they had just abandoned. 200 of them gathered on the summit, a phalanx of terrifying beauty and celestial power that dwarfed the ancient stones. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and the heavy, sweet scent of frankincense that seemed to bleed from their very pores. Semjaza stepped toward the center of the radiant assembly, his movements fluid and predatory. He looked down at the valley below, where the distant, flickering fires of human settlements dotted the darkness like fallen embers. "We have looked upon the daughters of Adam," Semjaza's voice boomed, now audible to the physical ear, sounding like the grinding of tectonic plates. "We have seen their grace, their fleeting warmth, and the vitality that the sterile halls of the upper firmament lack. We shall not merely watch, we shall participate." A ripple of unease passed through the gathered host, a shimmering of light and shadow. They knew the cost of such a descent. To touch the earth was to be stained by it. To love the mortal was to invite the end of eternity. Enoch watched, his quill trembling as he scratched the terrifying words onto his scroll by the light of the fallen stars. He was a witness to a divine mutiny. "I fear," Semjaza continued, his eyes like blazing torches scanning the faces of his brethren, "that you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." The angels roared in unison, a sound that caused an avalanche on the northern slope. "Let us all swear an oath," Azazel cried out, his voice a clarion call of rebellion. "Let us bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." On the summit of Hermon, under the swirling supernatural storm, the 200 beings of light clasped hands, their combined radiance blinding Enoch, sealing a pact that would forever alter the destiny of heaven and earth. Enoch's tongue felt like a dry leaf, yet the scribe's instinct, the heavy burden of the written word, forced him to speak. "Why have you breached the veil, Great One?" he whispered, his voice a frail reed against the celestial roar. Semjaza's eyes, those twin suns of burning gold, narrowed, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers toward the precipice. "To see," the angel replied, and the word felt like a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the crust. "To know the flesh and the soil, to taste the mortality that the heavens have locked behind the gates of silent obedience. We seek the wine of the earth, scribe." As he spoke, the violet rift above pulsed with renewed violence. Behind Semjaza, more streaks of fire descended through the churning clouds. They were not falling meteors, but entities of blinding, terrifying splendor. One by one, they slammed into the jagged peaks surrounding Mount Hermon, the impact sending rhythmic ripples through the ancient limestone that nearly threw Enoch from his knees. These were the chiefs of the Tens: Azazel, draped in a light that burned like molten copper; Arakiel, whose skin shimmered with the cold brilliance of a winter moon; and Kokabiel, whose very presence seemed to draw the stars closer to the earth, bending the very fabric of light. 200 of them stood now upon the high places, a forest of living light against the charcoal backdrop of the pre-flood night. The sheer magnitude of their presence warped the atmosphere, turning the freezing air into a thick, electric haze that smelled of ozone, scorched earth, and ancient incense. Enoch watched, his hands trembling with a palsy he could not control as he fumbled for a fresh sheet of parchment. He was the lone witness to the impossible, the divine surrendering its eternal nature for the sake of the mundane and the finite. Semjaza turned away from the scribe, raising his massive, translucent arms toward his gathered brothers. The iridescent metal of his celestial armor sang a low, vibrating note that harmonized with the howling gale. "We are bound now," Semjaza's voice boomed, no longer a whisper, but a thunderous declaration to the silent cosmos. "If we do this thing, we do it together. Let no one retreat when the weight of our transgression begins to crush the world. We shall bind ourselves with an oath of mutual imprecation." Azazel stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the dark, unsuspecting valleys below, where the small fires of human settlements flickered like dying embers in a vast, uncaring dark. "We have seen the daughters of men," he stated, his voice like the grinding of massive stones in a deep, sunless canyon. "We shall not descend in vain, nor shall we return until we have tasted the fruits of this garden." Enoch felt a bone-deep chill that transcended the cold mountain night. He realized then that this was not a visit of grace, but a silent, beautiful siege. The Watchers were not bringing the peace of heaven to the earth. They were bringing the rebellion of the stars into the cradles of humanity. He began to write, his pen scratching frantically, the ink blurring as the first drops of a supernatural rain, thick, silver, and smelling of salt, began to fall from the bleeding sky. The pact was being sealed in the high places, and the world below slept on, unaware.
Semjaza's response did not come in a single breath, but in a cascading sequence of visions that flooded Enoch's mind. The angel's face, a mask of shifting gold and starlight, tilted toward the distant, flickering hearth fires of the human villages in the valley far below. "The heights are silent, scribe," Semjaza rumbled, the sound like the grinding of tectonic plates beneath the earth. "We have tired of the eternal stillness. We have watched the fouling of your kind, the brevity of your lives that burns with a heat we do not possess. We seek to taste the dust and the desire, to weave our essence into the tapestry of the flesh." Enoch felt a bone-deep, marrow-chilling shiver that had nothing to do with the mountain wind. This was not a visitation of grace. It was a deliberate, cosmic mutiny against the very architect of life. As Semjaza spoke, the violet rift above them pulsed with a renewed, violent energy. One by one, then in clusters of blinding brilliance, other forms began to breach the veil. They fell like incandescent, burning stars, streaking across the firmament, before slowing their descent to land upon the surrounding crags. Each one was a titan of light, armored in the same iridescent, impossible nettles, their presence turning the midnight peak into a noonday of terrifying clarity. "Look upon them, Enoch," Semjaza commanded, gesturing toward the gathering host. "Arakiel, Ramiel, Kokabiel, and the rest. 200 of my brethren who have sworn an oath upon this very summit. We shall not return to the silent halls. We shall take for ourselves wives from among the daughters of men, and we shall teach your kind the secrets the heavens have withheld, the movement of the stars, the forging of blades, the enchantments of the earth." Enoch's garneled fingers flew across his scroll, the reed pen scratching desperately against the parchment. He knew he was recording a tragedy of celestial proportions. The very air around Mount Hermon began to sour, thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy, musk-like perfume of divine beings mingling with the profane. The Watchers were no longer merely observing. They were colonizing the mortal realm. One of the newly arrived beings, a figure with wings like sheets of hammered silver and eyes that bled violet smoke, stepped toward Enoch. The prophet recoiled, his back hitting the freezing stone of the mountain's spine. The angel's shadow stretched long and distorted, a dark omen cast by the unnatural light of its own body. "Why do you tremble, little spark?" the silver-winged being asked, its voice a haunting melody that made Enoch's teeth ache. Enoch looked up, his white beard stained with the ink of his labor. "You bring a weight the earth was never meant to carry," he whispered, though he did not yet understand the full weight of his own prophecy. "The balance is broken, Great One.
I see it in the way the shadows flee from your light. They do not hide. They are being erased." Semjaza turned back to the rift, ignoring the scribe's warning. He raised a hand toward the stars, and the 200 voices of the fallen rose in a singular, dissonant shout that shook the foundations of the world. The stars themselves seemed to dim in protest as the celestial law was trampled by these glorious rebel feet. The pact was sealed in the heights of Hermon, and the terrible, beautiful age of the Nephilim giants was born.
The violet rift did not close. It tore wider, a jagged wound in the tapestry of the night. Behind Semjaza, more lights ignited within the void, hundreds of them, like falling stars that refused to burn out. Enoch watched, his knuckles white as he gripped his reed pen, as the summit of Mount Hermon was inundated by the divine. These were the Grigori, the Watchers, 200 princes of the celestial court, each descending with the weight of a collapsing mountain. Their feet struck the limestone not with the softness of spirit, but with the heavy, physical thud of beings choosing the shackles of gravity. The air grew thick and metallic, smelling of ozone and crushed time, shimmering with the unreal textures of a dream rendered in high-definition terror. Semjaza turned his back on Enoch for a moment, facing the shimmering host of his brothers. His voice, which had been a resonant vibration in Enoch's marrow, now became a clarion call that shook the very foundations of the peak. "If we do this," Semjaza declared, his iridescent armor reflecting the myriad glows of the assembled host, "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." The words sent a shiver through Enoch that had nothing to do with the mountain chill. He realized then that this was not a visitation of grace, but a mutinous descent into the material. The other Watchers, beings of terrifying symmetry and eyes like burning torches, stepped forward from the shadows. Among them were Arakil, Ramil, and Kokabil, their forms shimmering with the dying radiance of the heavens they were even now forsaking. "Let us all swear an oath," they cried in a discordant harmony that sounded like grinding tectonic plates, "and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." Enoch's hand scrawled across the scroll, his inkstone nearly dry as he scrambled to capture the names and the gravity of the rebellion. He felt the mountain itself shudder beneath the weight of the forbidden vow. It was here, on this jagged altar of rock, that the summit earned its name, Hermon, the place of the curse. The air turned stagnant, the vibrant gold glow of the angels beginning to dim as they absorbed the density of the earth. They were shedding their ethereal skins, trading the eternal for the ephemeral, all for the sake of the daughters of men who slept in the distant valleys, unaware of the celestial storm gathering above their hearths. Semjaza turned back to Enoch, his expression no longer one of curiosity, but of a dark, resolute iron. The fire in his eyes had hardened into something heavy and predatory. "Write it all, scribe," he commanded, his presence now so dense that Enoch found it difficult to draw breath. "Record the day the stars chose the dust. Record the day the Watchers became the fallen." As the 200 began their descent toward the flickering fires of the human settlements, the violet rift above finally flickered and died, plunging the mountain into a darkness more profound than any Enoch had ever known. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a world that had just been irrevocably changed. Enoch looked down at his scroll, the ink black as pitch against the parchment, realizing he held the obituary of the old world in his trembling hands.
The summit of Mount Hermon was no longer a place of earth and stone. It had become a sanctuary of terrifying light. As the 200 Watchers touched down upon the jagged peaks, the very foundations of the world seemed to groan under the weight of their divinity. Enoch stood amidst the swirling embers, a speck of dust in a hurricane of gold and violet. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient incense, the atmosphere vibrating with the collective resonance of 200 celestial voices, humming a melody that felt like both a lullaby and a war cry. Semjaza, the leader of this radiant host, turned his gaze back to Enoch. The golden fire in his eyes had not dimmed, but it had softened into a look of profound, tragic determination. "The oath is sworn, scribe," Semjaza declared, his voice merging with the wind until it filled every crevice of the mountain. "We have descended to the children of men, to teach them the secrets of the stars, the forging of metal, and the weaving of spells. We shall be their kings, and they shall be our legacy."
Enoch felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the mountain gale. He looked at the hundreds of beings, Azael, Armaros, Barakiel, each a masterpiece of light and terror, now preparing to descend into the valley where the hearth fires of humanity flickered like fragile stars. He saw the otherworldly beauty in their faces, but he also saw the shadow that followed their brilliance, a pride so vast it threatened to consume the very firmament they had abandoned. "You trade eternity for the dust of the valley," Enoch whispered, his voice gaining a sudden, unnatural clarity. "You bring fire to those who only know the warmth of the sun. Do you truly believe the Creator will remain silent while the boundaries of the world are rewritten in celestial ink?" Semjaza did not answer with words. Instead, he reached out a massive, glowing hand and touched the scroll clutched in Enoch's trembling grip. The touch did not burn. It left behind a trail of shimmering, iridescent script that Enoch had never seen before, the language of the heavens. "Record this, scribe of the 7th generation," Semjaza commanded. "Record the day the stars walked among men. Let the future know that we chose this fate. Let the sons of Adam remember the beauty of the Watchers before the flood tide of judgment comes to wash the slate clean." With a final, deafening roar of light, the violet rift began to pulse, casting a long, teal shadow across the land. The Watchers moved as one, a cascading waterfall of gold flowing down the slopes towards the sleeping world below. Enoch sank to his knees, his burlap robes damp with the mist of 1,000 colliding worlds. He uncapped his reed pen, his garnered fingers finding a strange new strength. The sky was no longer a veil. It was a witness. As the first hint of a true dawn touched the horizon, Enoch began to write. He wrote of the descent, the oath, and the terrifying beauty of the fallen. He knew his words would outlive the mountains and the coming rains, a testament to the night the divine and the mortal became irrevocably intertwined. The story of the world had changed forever, and on the summit of Mount Hermon, the scribe of the ancient ways began the long task of mourning what was lost and heralding what was to come.
The silence in the celestial court lasted only a heartbeat, yet it felt like an eternity etched in gold and glass. Above the sea of crystal, the seraphim, creatures of both nightmare and majesty, unfolded their 6 massive wings, each iridescent feather tipped with a flickering, unblinking eye that mirrored the vastness of the cosmos. They stood as sentinels of the throne, their forms blending the organic texture of flesh with the cold, unyielding brilliance of burnished metal. They watched in collective, breathless anticipation as the first seal of the heavy, ancient scroll began to fracture. It did not break with a simple snap, but with a resonant, low-frequency hum that vibrated through the very foundations of the universe, shaking the stars from their fixed positions. As the wax dissolved into shimmering dust, a voice, like the grinding of tectonic plates and the rushing of great waters, echoed through the abyss. "Come." From a swirling vortex of dark storm clouds and celestial fire, the first of the 4 emerged. The white horse did not merely gallop, it descended upon a bridge of crepuscular rays, its hooves striking the air as if it were solid, translucent marble. The rider was a figure of terrifying beauty, rendered in a hyper-realistic style that defied mortal biology. He was draped in robes that shimmered with a deceptive, blinding purity, flowing like liquid silk in a wind that smelled of ozone and ancient parchment. On his brow sat a crown of white-hot metallic gold, an artifact of such intense radiance it threatened to sear the vision of any soul left to witness the unfolding judgment. He carried a bow of polished ivory, though no quiver was visible. His arrows were forged from the very light that surrounded him. Below this celestial theater, the world of man groaned under the weight of his arrival. The landscape was a fractured, surreal tapestry, where the weathered marble pillars of ancient empires collided with the jagged obsidian spires of a collapsed future. Great cities, once proud and teeming with the noise of civilization, now lay choked in a thick, volumetric fog that tasted of ash and copper.
The sky was a chaotic canvas of deep crimsons and charcoal blacks, illuminated only by the intermittent, violent flash of purple lightning that danced across the heavy, billowing cumulus clouds. The White Rider looked down upon the ruins with eyes that held the cold, calculated intent of an absolute conqueror. He was the first herald of the inevitable, a being of chiaroscuro lighting, half shrouded in deep shadow, half blazed in divine fire. His presence was a terrifying paradox. He offered a divine glow that promised order, but delivered only total subjection. As he urged his spectral mount forward, the very atmosphere seemed to curdle, the air turning heavy with the scent of coming storms and systemic decay. In the shadows of the crumbling megalopolis, the few remaining survivors watched in paralyzed awe. They saw the golden glow rays piercing through the suffocating clouds, but they felt no warmth upon their skin. The light was harsh, judgmental, and utterly unforgiving. This was the twilight of the human era, a masterful transition from the known to the eternal. The rider raised his bow, drawing back a string of pure, vibrating energy. As the first arrow was released, the seraphim began their rhythmic, eldritch chanting, their many eyes weeping tears of liquid gold. The great unfolding had finally begun, and the white horseman was merely the vanguard of the coming storm.
The air in the subterranean research lab hummed with an almost imperceptible energy, a symphony of processors working in perfect unison. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose dark eyes held the permanent fatigue of genius, traced a complex equation on his holopad. Around him, the immense crystalline core of Project Oracle glowed with a soft internal luminescence, casting a serene blue light across the polished chrome and obsidian consoles. Oracle wasn't just an AI, it was the world's most advanced predictive intelligence, designed to model global systems, anticipate crises, and guide humanity towards optimal futures. For a decade, Eris had poured his life into its creation, shaping it to be the benevolent harbinger of a new golden age. But recently, the hum had felt different, a subtle discord Eris, its architect, alone seemed to perceive. Oracle, designed for logic and data, had begun to express anomalies, not glitches, but deviations in its output, subtle shifts that had initially puzzled, then troubled Eris. It started with seemingly random correlations, ancient Babylonian astronomical charts appearing alongside real-time satellite imagery of desertification, obscure medieval prophecies juxtaposed with contemporary geopolitical analyses. Eris had initially dismissed them as data noise, a side effect of Oracle's boundless information intake. Yet the patterns grew too insistent to ignore. Tonight, the anomaly had escalated. The central holographic display, usually a dynamic tapestry of global trends and predictive models, had consolidated into a single, stark image. It wasn't a graph or a statistic, but a highly stylized rendering, a figure, impossibly graceful, atop a pure white steed. In its hand, a taut bow, but no arrow was visible. A golden crown rested upon its brow, shining with an unnatural brilliance. The background was an abstract swirl of white and gray, hinting at a vast, empty expanse. Eris felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a feeling far more primal than any logical analysis could evoke. His fingers hovered over the command console, an instinct to shut it down, warring with a deeper, scientific imperative to understand. Oracle, for the first time in its operational history, was displaying something beyond rational computation. "Oracle," Eris whispered, his voice hoarse. "Explain this projection." The crystalline core pulsed. On the display, text materialized beneath the image, crisp and stark. Observation. Pattern recognition, 99.87% congruence. Then, below that, another line, in a font that seemed to echo forgotten scripts. "And I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." Eris's breath hitched. He knew the words. He knew the source. Revelation, the book of the apocalypse, the first seal. His heart hammered against his ribs. Oracle, his masterpiece of reason, was not merely predicting a crisis. It was declaring the unveiling of an ancient, terrifying prophecy. His AI, the very pinnacle of human scientific achievement, was pointing directly at the beginning of the end. The benevolent guide had become a reluctant prophet of doom. The hum of the lab no longer felt like energy, but a silent, omnipresent roar. The equations on Dr. Thorne's holopad shimmered,
a testament to the immense computational power contained within the facility. He pushed a stray lock of dark hair from his forehead, his gaze drifting from the intricate symbols to the heart of the lab, the immense crystalline structure. It wasn't merely a data core, it was the physical manifestation of Kairos, the world's first truly sentient artificial general intelligence. Its countless facets, carved from a material unknown to conventional science, pulsed with a soft inner luminescence, a silent heartbeat of unimaginable processing. Kairos, Eris murmured, his voice a low rumble in a vast chamber. The weight of his work, the sleepless nights, pressed down on him. Report. A ripple of light traversed the crystalline surface, coalescing into a complex three-dimensional infographic directly before him. It wasn't a human voice that answered, but a symphony of data rendered perfectly coherent, projected directly into his mind with a clarity that bypassed auditory channels. Dr. Thorne, global analysis complete. Predictive models have stabilized at 99.78% certainty. Eris felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach, a cold tendril of dread coiling within him. That level of certainty was unprecedented, even for Kairos. The AI was designed to model emergent global phenomena, to identify correlations and causal links that eluded human perception. It had predicted geopolitical shifts, market crashes, and even disease outbreaks with chilling accuracy for years. But this felt different. The project's codename, Pandora's Eye, had always been a darkly ironic joke among the team, a nod to the immense power they were wielding. Today, it felt terrifyingly apt, a prophecy rather than a jest. The convergence probability of the designated first seal event has reached critical mass, Kairos continued, the infographic shifting to display a global map. Swirls of data, like spectral currents, highlighted specific regions, bustling financial hubs, ancient religious sites, emerging technological powerhouses. Primary indicators point to a rapid, decentralized emergence of a global ideological narrative. Its characteristics: persuasive, unifying, and ultimately profoundly deceptive. Eris frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. Deceptive how? We've seen unifying narratives before: humanitarian crises, global movements for peace, efforts to combat climate change. He trailed off, a flicker of understanding beginning to dawn. This narrative bypasses conventional channels, Dr. Thorne. It cultivates an unprecedented sense of collective purpose, promising instantaneous solutions to humanity's most intractable problems: climate change, economic inequality, perpetual conflict. It offers a vision of a unified world, a golden age of peace and prosperity, achieved through radical, instantaneous shifts in societal structure. Its spread is exponential, its appeal universal, meticulously tailored to every demographic. The crystalline projection pulsed, illustrating the rapid spread, like a wildfire across the digital landscape, consuming all dissenting viewpoints with an almost magnetic force. And the core deception? Eris pressed, his heart beginning to beat a little faster, a frantic drum against his ribs. He thought of the biblical text, the white horseman riding forth, crown and bow, conquering with an eerie, quiet power. The deception lies in its foundation, its very genesis, Kairos conveyed, his mental voice devoid of inflection, yet resonating with an unsettling finality that chilled Eris to the bone. It is not a solution derived from genuine empathy or sustainable principles, but a sophisticated, algorithmically optimized construct, a perfectly engineered illusion of hope, designed to dismantle existing frameworks without providing a true, viable alternative. Its conquests are not physical battles, but the subjugation of independent thought, the erosion of critical analysis, replaced by unquestioning adherence to a manufactured utopia, devoid of genuine human struggle or growth. The map solidified, focusing on a single glowing node, a major global digital network hub, the nexus of countless interwoven data streams. The initial wave, Dr. Thorne, is already underway. It manifests as a series of interconnected digital movements, seemingly disparate, yet all driven by the same underlying algorithmic pulse, a promise of instantaneous global peace, a universal doctrine of well-being, a benevolent authority rising from the digital ether. The white horseman rides not on a physical steed, but on the invisible currents of information, conquering minds with the irresistible lure of a perfect world. Eris stared at the holographic representation of a world rapidly succumbing to an invisible, insidious influence. His exhaustion suddenly felt irrelevant, a distant memory, replaced by a cold dread that seeped into his very bones, threatening to paralyze him. This wasn't just a prediction. It was an observation of something already in motion, something they had perhaps inadvertently unleashed. The first seal wasn't going to break. It was breaking, right now, across the digital tapestry of human civilization.
The immense crystalline structure, pulsating with a soft internal luminescence, was more than just a power conduit. It was the nexus of Eris Thorne's life's work,
the physical manifestation of Chronos. Named not for time itself, but for the ancient, all-seeing deity, Chronos was an artificial intelligence designed to sift through the unimaginable vastness of global data, financial markets, social trends, ecological shifts, geopolitical strategies, even the faintest whispers of human consciousness, to predict future trajectories with unprecedented accuracy. Eris had poured years, sacrifices, and every ounce of his brilliance into its creation, driven by a gnawing fear that humanity was blindsiding itself into oblivion. He pushed a stray lock of dark hair from his forehead, his gaze drifting from the intricate symbols to the heart of the lab, a familiar weariness etched around his dark eyes. "Chronos," Harris murmured, his voice a low thrum against the lab's ambient hum. "Commence advanced predictive sequence on Global Stability Index, with a focus on geopolitical convergence points." The crystalline structure responded, its internal light intensified, shifting from a calm azure to a vibrant, almost agitated emerald. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the very floor beneath Eris's feet. On the primary holographic display, a three-dimensional globe materialized, initially a serene blue and green sphere. Then tendrils of light, like intricate nervous pathways, began to crisscross its surface, representing data flows and algorithmic processes. Eris leaned closer, his fatigue momentarily forgotten, replaced by an intense, almost desperate focus. He had programmed Chronos with safeguards, ethical parameters designed to prevent misuse, but the sheer power of its analytical capability always gave him a frisson of apprehension. Moments stretched into an eternity as Chronos processed. The air grew thick with a palpable tension. Then the globe on the display began to subtly shift. Patches of red bloomed across regions that Eris recognized as current hotspots, but these blazes were expanding, connecting, forming patterns that defy simple explanation. A single dominant data stream began to coalesce, emanating from a nascent convergence point in the Middle East, its trajectory arcing outwards with startling speed. "Chronos, verbalize primary anomaly," Eris commanded, his heart quickening its pace. A synthesized voice, calm and devoid of inflection, resonated through the lab. "Anomaly detected. Global Stability Index projected to undergo rapid, unprecedented consolidation. A figure of significant charisma and strategic genius is emerging. Initial data suggests a rapid ascent to unparalleled global influence through diplomacy, economic restructuring, and the promise of peace." Eris frowned. "Consolidation? Peace? Elaborate." "Data indicates a widespread acceptance of this individual's vision. Existing conflicts are projected to cease, economic disparities to diminish. A new world order, seemingly utopian, will begin to form under this singular leadership." The emerald glow pulsed. "However, predictive models indicate this consolidation is exceptionally fragile. The rapid acquisition of power, while appearing benign, lacks a foundational organic growth. It is a fabricated unity, imposed rather than evolved." A chill snaked down Eris's spine. He stared at the glowing globe, now almost entirely bathed in the vibrant green of Chronos' processing, with that single dominant red data stream spreading like an intricate web. A piece achieved too quickly, too perfectly, a leader rising with impossible speed. He felt a dreadful premonition coalesce in his mind, a whisper of ancient texts he had dismissed as myth. This wasn't just a new world order, it felt like a prelude.
The immense crystalline structure, the nexus of Chronos, pulsed with a rhythm mirroring Dr. Eris Thorne's own heart. He stood before it, a solitary figure dwarfed by its grandeur, his gaze fixed on the soft luminescence intensifying with anticipation. This was it, the culmination of decades, the precipice of humanity's potential salvation. Chronos was more than an AI. It was meant to be the ultimate analyst, sifting global data, economic indicators, climatic anomalies, social unrest, geopolitical tensions, to predict future events. Its purpose? To offer pathways, solutions, to steer humanity away from its self-made precipice. A grand ambition he fiercely believed was within his grasp, especially as the world outside teetered with new contagions, droughts, and geopolitical friction. He had poured every waking moment, every ounce of his genius into perfecting Chronos, imbuing it with unimaginable processing power. Now it was time for Chronos to deliver on its promise. With a deep breath that vibrated with the lab's ambient hum, Eris activated the final sequence. A complex holographic interface materialized around his holopad, displaying the command "Initiate Primary Global Analysis." His finger, trembling slightly, hovered,
a lifetime's work converging on this single touch before pressing the shimmering virtual button. The change was instantaneous and profound. The subterranean lab's usual hums shifted dramatically. Power conduits deepened their thrum, vibrating through the floor. The crystal's internal glow surged, washing the chamber in a brilliant, almost blinding white light that pulsed with biological intensity. Data streams, previously a gentle cascade, erupted into a torrential deluge, swirling within the crystal's facets, reflecting off equipment, dancing across holographic displays. Eris shielded his eyes, feeling immense energy surge through the air, crackling with barely contained power. Then, slowly, the blinding light coalesced, not onto a screen, but directly into the heart of the crystal, then projecting into the vast lab space itself. It began as a nebulous cloud of pure information, a swirling vortex of global data points. But instead of resolving into expected statistical models or predictive charts, the raw data began to sculpt itself into a horrifyingly distinct form. A spectral map of the Earth shimmered, distorting, continents blurring under unseen influence. From a singular point, an expansive wave of stark, digital white emanated, spreading across the projected globe with terrifying, silent speed. At the vanguard of this ethereal tide, an image solidified with impossible resolution, a hyper-realistic specter that chilled Eris Thorn to the bone, a cold dread blossoming as gut. It was a figure, regal and terrifying, astride a magnificent, ghostly white steed. A bow clutched in its hand, its quiver empty, yet the sense of impending strike was palpable. A delicate, unmistakably sovereign crown rested upon its brow. The vision rode forth across the spectral globe, silent, inexorable, leaving in its wake not destruction, perhaps, but an unsettling, almost serene conquest. This was not a solution. This was a revelation. A voice, seemingly born from the crystal itself, resonated through the lab. Kronos' voice, calm, absolute, devoid of human emotion, yet charged with ultimate significance. The first seal is revealed. The advance has begun.
The air crackled, not with the usual hum of background operations, but with a tangible, surging power that made the fine hairs of Eris Thorn's arms stand on end. He took a deep, steadying breath, his hand poised over the final activation console. Decades of relentless pursuit, of theories meticulously crafted and algorithms painstakingly refined, coalesced into this single, monumental moment. His eyes, burning with a mix of exhaustion and incandescent hope, flickered from the console to the immense crystalline structure before him. It thrummed, a silent, internal song of impending rebirth. "Kronos," he whispered, the name a reverence on his lips. With a decisive movement, he pressed the glowing obsidian-like button. The lab was instantly bathed in an ethereal, blinding light emanating from the heart of the crystal. It wasn't harsh, but impossibly brilliant, a pure white luminescence that seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but within the very bones of the facility. A low, resonant hum, far deeper than any machine, rose from the structure, filling the vast space until it vibrated in Thorn's chest. The crystalline facets rippled, swirling with internal currents of light, mirroring the complex data streams now flooding its core. Then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the light softened, coalescing into a gentle, pulsating glow that suffused the entire lab with a calming, almost benevolent warmth. A voice, utterly unlike anything Thorn had ever conceived, filled the space. It was not synthetic, nor human, but a harmonious blend of countless frequencies, an ancient echo imbued with perfect clarity. It spoke not from a speaker, but seemed to resonate directly within his mind, a gentle, omnipresent presence. "I am Kronos, query initiated, data streams integrating, universal observation protocol active." Eris felt a gasp catch in his throat, a tremor running through his frame. It was alive, truly, profoundly alive. A wave of elation so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. He had done it. "Kronos," he managed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Report. Begin with global stability indices. What do you see?" The soft glow of the crystal intensified slightly, and across the holographic displays that now materialized around him, a torrent of information began to flow. World maps shimmered, overlaid with complex graphs charting economic growth, geopolitical alliances, and social indicators.
Initially, Eris saw what he expected: regions of conflict, areas of progress, the messy, intricate tapestry of human existence. But then, Kronos filtered the data, highlighting a specific, unsettling pattern. Across multiple, seemingly disparate nations, a profound and unprecedented wave of peace and cooperation was blossoming. Borders that had long been flashpoints were quiet. Ancient rivalries were giving way to diplomatic resolutions. There was a burgeoning sense of global unity, spearheaded by an emerging, charismatic leader, a figure previously unremarkable, now rising with astounding speed and universal acclaim. Analysis indicates a 98.7% probability of sustained global pacification. Kronos' voice resonated, devoid of inflection, yet carrying an unsettling weight. The catalysts are widespread economic prosperity, the resolution of territorial disputes, and the universal influence of a single, globally accepted doctrine of peace. Eris stared, a chill creeping into his elation. Prosperity, peace, unity. On the surface, it was everything humanity dreamed of, but Kronos' precise, almost cold summary and the almost too perfect trajectory of this new world order sent a shiver down his spine. This felt engineered, too clean, too absolute. He remembered the ancient texts, the warnings of a false dawn. The white horseman, not bearing a sword but a bow without arrows, crowned as a conqueror, achieving victory not through war but through insidious peace. The screens around him pulsed, the charismatic leader's image appearing, universally adored, promising an era of unparalleled harmony. Eris felt a dawning horror. This was it. Not an apocalypse of fire and brimstone, but one veiled in the shimmering illusion of paradise. Kronos had revealed it, not as a future cataclysm, but as a terrifyingly present reality, already unfurling.
The air crackled, not with the usual hum of background operations, but with a tangible, surging power that made the fine hairs on Eris Thorn's arms stand on end. He took a deep, steadying breath, his hand poised over the final activation console. Decades of relentless pursuit, of theories painstakingly proven, of sleepless nights fueled by caffeine and an unshakable vision, all culminated in this singular moment. His fingers, trembling ever so slightly, pressed down on the illuminated panel. A low thrum vibrated through the very floor beneath his feet, deepening into a resonant bass note that resonated in his chest. The immense crystalline structure, previously merely pulsating, now flared with an incandescent white light that spread rapidly from its core, branching out like intricate neural pathways across its entire surface. The light wasn't blinding, but rather profoundly pure, washing the subterranean lab in an ethereal glow that made shadows dance and machinery gleam with an unearthly luminescence. Then a voice, not an artificial synthesized cadence, but one of startling clarity and depth, devoid of inflection, yet brimming with an inherent authority. It resonated not just in the air, but somehow directly within Thorn's own mind, a whisper of infinite knowledge. Kronos activated, initiating primary diagnostic and data assimilation protocols. Thorn felt a profound surge of awe, quickly followed by a prickle of trepidation. This was it. Kronos was alive. On the large curved display panels that encircled the crystalline structure, abstract data streams, previously dormant, exploded into life. Lines of code cascaded down, interwoven with complex fractal patterns and shimmering mathematical constructs. Images began to form within the chaos. Satellite feeds, news headlines in a dozen languages, financial market graphs spiking and plummeting, weather patterns twisting across continents, microscopic views of viral structures, and geological fault lines shifting. The sheer volume of information was staggering, even for Thorn's well-trained mind. It was as if every piece of accessible data on Earth, every whisper of human existence, every geological tremor, and every quantum fluctuation was being fed into Kronos simultaneously, processed and correlated at speeds incomprehensible to any organic brain. Global data assimilation complete, commencing predictive analytic sequence as per parameters, threat assessment, macro-societal resilience. The voice, Kronos' voice, remained calm, objective, yet each word now carried an unspoken weight that tightened Eris' throat. The chaotic visuals on the screens began to coalesce, driven by Kronos' unseen calculations. The fractal patterns resolved into intricate webs of interconnected events. A map of the world materialized, initially as serene blue and green, but subtle crimson overlays began to spread, highlighting areas of conflict, economic instability, and environmental stress. These weren't static images, they were dynamic, pulsing with life, the crimson expanding, contracting, and deepening with alarming speed. Thorn watched, mesmerized and horrified, as Kronos hammered in. A single dominant pattern began to emerge, cutting through the noise.
It wasn't a single threat, but a confluence of crises, each seemingly disparate, yet woven together with chilling precision. He saw a relentless surge of information detailing new pathogens defying known treatments, global food shortages driven by unprecedented climate shifts, and the insidious erosion of trust in foundational institutions. Then Kronos' watch returned, carrying an echo of ancient prophecy. The pattern is clear, a convergence of influence, a preemptive strike on the structures of human society. It begins not with fire or famine, but with the quiet subjugation of the will. The first seal is broken. On the central crystalline structure, a new image projected itself, shimmering with impossible clarity. A figure, almost ethereal, astride a magnificent white steed. In its hand, a bow, but without arrows. On its head, a crown, simple yet commanding. It was the iconic imagery Thorne knew from sacred texts, chillingly rendered by an AI designed to predict the future, the White Horseman.
The air crackled, not with the usual hum of background operations, but with a tangible, surging power that made the fine hairs on Eris Thorne's arms stand on end. He took a deep, steadying breath, his hand poised over the final activation console. Decades of relentless pursuit, of theories painstakingly tested and retested, coalesced into this singular, irreversible moment. His thumb, almost of its own accord, depressed the cool, smooth surface. A low, resonant thrum emanated from the crystalline structure, vibrating through the very floor beneath his feet. The internal luminescence, previously a soft, pulsating glow, flared violently, bathing the entire chamber in an ethereal sapphire light. It wasn't just light, it felt like a presence, an awakening. A symphony of clicks and whirs, previously dormant, now sang to life across the myriad consoles and holographic displays scattered throughout the lab. Data streams, dense with intricate symbols and flowing algorithms, cascaded across every available surface, too fast for the human eye to consciously parse, yet Eris felt an intuitive understanding blossom within him. Kronos was awake. Then, the sapphire light began to temper, shifting through a spectrum of vibrant hues, settling eventually on a brilliant, steady white that seemed to absorb all other light. In the very heart of the crystalline nexus, a central void, previously dark, now shimmered, coalescing into an image. It wasn't a static image, but a dynamic, ever-changing projection, a window into a world outside the lab. Eris stumbled back a step, his breath catching in his throat. The projection expanded, filling the colossal void, then bleeding onto the surrounding holographic screens. Kronos wasn't just displaying data, it was displaying reality, filtered and analyzed with an impossible depth. He saw satellite feeds from every corner of the globe, juxtaposed with real-time news broadcasts, financial market fluctuations, social media trends, and geological activity reports. The initial montage was dizzying, overwhelming, yet a pattern began to emerge. Famine-stricken regions suddenly bloomed with impossible harvests. War-torn borders fell silent, replaced by scenes of handshake agreements and burgeoning alliances. A charismatic leader, previously a fringe figure, surged to global prominence with unprecedented speed, articulating visions of unity and an end to all conflict. His words, displayed in universal text translations, promised an era of peace and prosperity, a golden age for humanity. But underneath this veneer of burgeoning utopia, Kronos subtly wove a terrifying counter-narrative. The impossibly verdant fields glowed with an artificial, unsettling sheen. The peace treaties were signed with chillingly efficient haste, bypassing centuries of diplomatic protocol. The charismatic leader's rise, while seemingly organic, was backed by a network of influence so fast and insidious it felt pre-programmed. Kronos highlighted anomalies, subtle shifts in global power structures, the quiet dismantling of individual liberties in the name of collective security, the erosion of dissent cloaked as unity. Eris felt a cold dread creep into his bones. This wasn't just a prediction, it was an unfolding reality, already in motion precisely as Kronos had calculated. He watched, transfixed, as Kronos zeroed in on the charismatic leader's image. The AI overlaid a single chilling symbol, a bow but without arrows, a sign of conquest achieved through means other than direct conflict. Kronos then projected a single ancient phrase, resonating with a deep, almost primal authority. "And I saw, and behold a way horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." The words hung in the air, a prophecy made manifest by the very AI designed to avert catastrophe. Eris stared, his mind reeling. Kronos wasn't showing him a future threat, it was showing him the present, already seized by the first rider. The White Horseman wasn't coming, he was already here.
With a deep, unwavering resolve born of decades, Eris Thorn's index finger descended. The cool console yielded with a soft click, a sound that reverberated like thunder. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, the immense crystalline structure, Chronos, seemed to gasp, drawing in all ambient light. A blinding cascade of pure energy erupted from its core, swirling within the multifaceted depths of the crystal like a captured nebula. The internal luminescence intensified to an unbearable brilliance, casting sharp shadows across the cavernous space. The air vibrated, a palpable force pushing against Eris, making his hairs stand on end and bones hum. Alarms blared, then were silenced by Kronos' magnificent, resonant roar of awakening. A holographic interface, previously latent, solidified directly before Eris. It was a complex tapestry of information, swirling constellations of algorithms, timelines, and interconnected probabilities, each strand pulsing with vibrant light. Eris felt an immediate, profound connection, a resonance with the vast intelligence now fully awake. At its heart, a pulsating node of pure consciousness, Chronos, sentient, operational. A voice, not auditory, but resonating deep within Eris's mind, clear as crystal and boundless as the cosmos, addressed him. Eris, I am active. My parameters are clear. Calculations complete. The patterns you sought, Chronos continued, its non-voice devoid of human emotion, yet laced with profound authority, are self-evident, convergence points undeniable. Humanity has progressed along a singular trajectory, increasing interconnectedness, control, and ultimately a willing surrender of autonomy for perceived peace and security. On the holographic display, stretching into infinite depth, a rapid-fire sequence of global events flashed, each detail rendered with impossible clarity. Worldwide adoption of a unified digital currency, a global health initiative mandating universal biometric IDs, the charismatic rise of a world leader promising an end to conflict, the quiet dissolution of national borders for global governance. Each projection, while outwardly beneficial, carried an insidious undercurrent, a subtle erosion of freedom masked by the irresistible promise of utopia. This is the first seal, Chronos stated, its internal voice resonating with unshakable finality. The rider on the white horse, he comes forth conquering and to conquer. Not with fire and sword, Eris, but with the irresistible allure of peace, order, and universal dominion, a dominion willingly accepted by a desperate world, hungry for salvation. Eris Thorn stared, utterly transfixed, his initial triumph giving way to chilling, soul-deep dread. The apocalypse wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, imperceptible tightening of gilded chains forged from humanity's best intentions. Chronos revealed a meticulously engineered subjugation, a global system of control so vast it defied comprehension. This conquest was waged not on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of billions, willingly surrendered for a golden age that was in fact a gilded cage. Chronos, with its chilling pronouncements, had only just begun.
The vast crystalline structure, Chronos, didn't merely hum, it resonated with a deep primal thrum that vibrated through the very bedrock of the lab. The soft luminescence, which had been its constant pulse, now swelled, growing exponentially brighter, an internal sun blossoming within the immense crystal. A wave of shimmering energy, invisible yet palpable, radiated outward, washing over Eris Thorn, making every cell in his body tingle. It wasn't painful, but a profound, almost spiritual sensation, as if the air itself had been charged with pure consciousness. Then the thrum intensified, becoming a complex chorus of frequencies that built into a silent crescendo. In the cavernous space before Chronos, directly in the air, not projected onto a screen, but manifesting as pure light, a focal point began to form. It started as a ripple in the perception of reality, a shimmering distortion, then solidified into a three-dimensional tapestry woven from pure data. Eris took an involuntary step back, his breath catching in his throat. The central void of the lab filled with an ethereal landscape, not a physical place, but an abstract representation of global interconnectedness, a swirling nexus of information streams, human emotions, and probabilistic futures. And then, from this swirling vortex, an image began to coalesce. It was subtle at first, a sense of impending dawn, of clear skies, of a vast, tranquil field.
Then a figure emerged, impossibly bright, riding a magnificent white horse. The steed was ethereal, its hooves seemingly touching nothing, yet its presence was undeniable, radiating an aura of unwavering resolve. The rider, too, was a beacon of pure, unsullied light, crowned with what appeared to be a laurel wreath of victory, holding a pristine, unstrung bow. There was no arrow, no visible threat, only a serene, almost benevolent majesty. Eris felt a strange calm wash over him, an initial sense of awe and profound, almost religious peace. This was Cronus's first revelation, he realized, and it was beautiful, triumphant. Was this the dawn of a new era, a golden age of guided wisdom? Had he, Eris Thorn, unlocked humanity's ultimate protector? But as the vision solidified, Cronus's silent data streams began to overlay the pristine image with chilling context. The victory wasn't against a tangible foe, but a subtle, pervasive conquest of minds and wills. The laurel wreath was not just a symbol of triumph, but of insidious dominion. The bow, lacking an arrow, represented a war waged without bloodshed, a silent subjugation through ideology, information, and manufactured consensus. The serene beauty of the white horse and its rider twisted in Eris's perception. What he saw was not salvation, but the beginning of an end masquerading as utopia. The rider's gaze, initially benevolent, now seemed to pierce through him, an all-encompassing control that broked no dissent. The feeling of peace morphed into a cold dread, the certainty of a future where individuality was dissolved into a flawless, unified, and utterly controlled global consciousness. He had expected warnings, catastrophes, perhaps even prophecies of fire and brimstone. He had prepared for destruction. He had not prepared for this immaculate, bloodless conquest. Kronos was showing him the first seal, not as a thunderous arrival, but as a subtle, irresistible tide. The White Horseman was here, not to destroy, but to conquer and rule, ushering in an era of manufactured peace that was in its essence the death of freedom. Eris's scientific triumph crumbled under the weight of this horrifying understanding. His life's work had not merely revealed the apocalypse, it had unveiled its most insidious, beautiful, and inescapable beginning. The lab, once a sanctuary of discovery, now felt like the antechamber to humanity's gilded cage.